What's the best way to subtly with someone? It was only a few weeks, but a supervisor on a construction site I worked on was complaining about the birds in front of his office. That night, I went to a pet shop and bought a big bag of birdseed. I hid it nearby, and when the coast was clear, I would scatter a couple of handfuls. It took a few days, but more and more birds started stopping by to look for food. I had over 30 pigeons out there one morning when he came in. I let him in on what I was doing one day when he'd pretty much given up and was throwing old bread out for the birds. He later asked me to pick up another bag of seed, as he'd taken over throwing out seed and had run out. Story number 2. Part 1. When I was a kid in the 80s, my neighbor used to go on vacation for 2 weeks every year during the summer. He relied on his friend, my dad, to get his mail and check on his house, which my dad did. My neighbor loved elaborate Christmas lights, like all over his entire house, and that took a lot of work. So he left them up all year and only turned them on at Christmas time. So for 2 weeks in the summer, my dad would turn his friends' Christmas lights on. But no one else in the neighborhood knew what was going on. Every once in a while, someone in the neighborhood would mention it, and he would act all confused because he was. Part 2. My grandpa used to work with a guy during the 60s who bragged about gas mileage. So his whole office would pitch in, buy gas, and siphon it into his car so his gas would last way longer than it should. Like, weeks. He would come in and brag about it, and everyone would laugh. Story number 3. One of my best friends was working as a section manager in a retail store. He bought a box of 400 rubber duckies off Amazon and started leaving a single one on his boss's desk at random times. He never said a word to her about it, and would pick odd times to do it to throw her off the scent. Like if he came in on an off day to shop, he'd sneak one in. He'd come in 30 minutes before his shift started to do it. He'd stay late to do it. He did this for at least 6 months before he got promoted and got a transfer. On his last day of work, he walked into her office with the box of the rest and turned them upside down on her desk. She hit something like a combo of hysterical laughter and sobbing. "Oh my God, I thought I was going insane." Reply: I would do something similar, but with picture frames. Every week, I'd buy 2 or 3 picture frames at the dollar store. I would find pictures of ugly babies online or odd celebrities, and I would leave them on people's desks. No one ever found out it was me. I imagine after I left for another job, they pieced it together, though. Most people would get a laugh, though I remember one specific person who got pissed. I put a picture of Maury Povich and wrote, "You are not the father," and added a fake autograph. The person who sat there went in that morning and instantly yelled at everyone, "Whoever's been doing this stupid shit, I'm not participating in these stupid office jokes, so leave me out of them." He then went and violently smashed the frame into the trash. One of my favorite ones, though. We had an insurance rep who would come in and explain benefits to new hires. She would give everyone a card with her picture on it. One day, I found a glorious picture frame in the shape of a heart with a glittery mess of a bedazzled sign that said, "Always and Forever." So naturally, I put her picture in Photoshop and blew it up. The quality was horrible. But it just made it that much better because of the frame. It looked like a picture you'd find acceptable to frame if you were the type of person who would buy that type of frame. Then I stayed late and left it on my manager's desk. I left it facing the door, so it appeared like one of those pictures people put of their family facing you when you speak to them at their desk. This meant when he opened the door, he would see it instantly because of how loud the frame was. Well, before he could see it, he injured himself and couldn't come into work, so it just sat in his office. He only came in about a week later, specifically to welcome a new team member, and of all days, this was the first time I heard her ask him if he had a minute to talk. He said yes, and they went into his office. The second he opened the door, he gave a very nervous laugh and said, "Shit, I think I can explain." Then the door shut behind them. Everyone heard him, but no one else knew what had happened. Everyone in the office looked at each other in confusion and shrugged at each other. I sat at my desk with my face in pain and tears in my eyes from trying so hard not to laugh. Story number 4. When I was a young E-nothing corpsman in the Navy, we took turns doing the coffee mess for the week. Whenever it was my turn, I would switch out for decaf for the whole week. Then, the next week, I'd switch it back to regular with espresso. Let me tell you, watching all the khakis lose their shit from caffeine detox one week and then look like jittery cokeheads the next was phenomenal. When I eventually gained some rank and left that command, I taught my little trick to one of my juniors. Some traditions must be upheld. Story number 5. My brother-in-law upset my younger sister. My older sister decided to teach him a lesson. For the next several months, he began receiving the most random items via the U.S. Postal Service with no return address, no letter, no explanation. What was sent? Sawdust, pocket lint, acorns, twigs, leaves, sand, and a dozen other harmless items. The kicker? My sister didn't send all of these items from one location, or even just herself. She got her friends and close colleagues involved. Due to the nature of her circle, the postmarks originated in locations across the U.S. He received random items from something like 28 different states and Canada. Eventually, he started to freak out and wanted to call the police and the FBI before they finally told him. My brother-in-law learned to compromise on home decor decisions going forward. Story number 6. When I was about 14 and my older brother was 17, he was a real violent dickhead. He made my life a living hell. He would take deep naps every afternoon. I would go to the kitchen, get the bottle of Wesson vegetable oil, and put a tablespoon or so in the cap. I'd sneak into his room and, with a Q-tip, dispense tiny drops of oil all over his exposed skin. He was a very pretty lad, so to turn his face, neck, back, and arms into a pizza pie was enormously distressing. He went on multiple medications. I probably did this for about 2 years. You want to beat up a girl who is half your size on the regular? He was bigger, but I was smarter. Story number 7. Picture this. A 16-year-old boy comes home from an exhausting day of being a 16-year-old boy. He heads to his bedroom, flings himself on his bed, and reaches for the TV remote. He presses the button, then presses it harder. Nothing. The fun starts here because I'd put a small piece of black tape over the infrared receiver on his TV. There was nothing to see on the remote itself. This was essential because I knew he would suspect my involvement immediately. His first thought was that I'd turned one of the batteries around. Not bad reasoning, I thought. So accusations and denials fly. New batteries are located and inserted, but alas, the problem persists. It was such fun listening to his frustration and hearing him having to get out of bed to change the channel, etc. I left it in place for several months. Then, after present opening on Christmas Day, I told him I had a little extra present for him in his room. He watched as I removed the little bit of tape. Marvelous. He's 29 now. Ah, such fond memories. Story number 8. During my first semester at college, my roommate always had girls over in our single-room dorm, forcing me to sleep in the common area and shower at the gym. As revenge, I started putting a Jolly Rancher candy inside our bathroom shower head. Every morning, they'd shower together, but when rinsing off, they'd be left with a thin layer of sugar on their skin and in their hair. The girls stopped coming over because they all felt sticky and gross throughout the day, leading them to attribute that unclean feeling to my roommate. By the beginning of the second semester, he couldn't get a date, which was 99% of the reason he was in college, so he dropped out. I had the dorm room to myself for the rest of the year. The first change I made was removing the remains of the Jolly Rancher from the shower head. Story number 9. I have a tendency to provoke people when they want something from me that I don't owe them, especially when I know it's their own trigger, and I truly didn't do anything wrong, like an annoying coworker, for example. I had a shift leader at a coffee shop who wanted me to need her help to boost her ego. So I pretended to be oblivious to what she wanted while I killed her with kindness, making sure not to give her anything she wanted. I was completely independent around her, and she would butt into my business to tell me I was doing something wrong so that I would need her. But when I asked others, they would reassure me that I was doing things correctly. When this shift leader would try to make me dependent on her, I'd be like, "Okay, thank you," as if I'm learning from her, then purposely continue doing it my way in front of her while pretending not to be aware of what she was hinting at. But I would always do it in a way where, if it escalated, I could be 100% honest about everything I did and said without lying, which would then make that person look crazy. But I don't walk around trying to provoke people. I just do it as a response to when they poke at or try to provoke me, so they are actually the ones in control of how far it goes. They get to decide how much more angry they want to get with me. I make it into a game. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible Reddit tales. Share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. I love hearing from you all. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring those amazing stories.